A growing debate among political strategists and foreign policy analysts is drawing attention to an unusual and unsettling claim that the rhetoric and political posture of former U.S. President Donald Trump may be placing Britain's monarch, King Charles III, in what one strategist describes as grave danger. The argument does not suggest a direct threat or deliberate intent, but rather a convergence of political messaging, global polarization, institutional symbolism, and security strain that could elevate risks around one of the world's most visible constitutional figures. At the heart of the strategist's claim is the idea that modern political power no longer operates only through laws, armies, or treaties, but through narratives. In a hyper-connected world, words spoken by influential leaders can ripple outward, shaping public emotions, legitimizing anger, and redefining who is seen as an enemy or an emblem of unwanted authority. According to this view, King Charles, by virtue of what he represents rather than anything he personally does, has become increasingly exposed. The monarchy as a political symbol in a polarized age. The British monarchy has long survived by existing above daily politics. Its legitimacy rests on continuity, restraint, and symbolism rather than partisan engagement. However, strategists argue that this careful neutrality is harder to maintain in an era of global populism, where institutions themselves are often framed as enemies of the people. Donald Trump's political style has consistently emphasized suspicion of elites, distrust of established institutions, and a combative approach to traditional symbols of authority. While much of this messaging has been directed inward at American political structures, its effects are not contained by borders. When powerful figures cast doubt on institutions that represent inherited authority, historical continuity, or transnational cooperation, those narratives can spill into other societies. King Charles III, as both a monarch and a symbol of Western tradition, can be pulled into this ideological crossfire even without explicit mention. The strategist argues that the danger lies not in a single statement, but in a sustained atmosphere that treats inherited authority as illegitimate and frames long-standing institutions as obstacles to national revival. Transatlantic influence and unintended consequences. The United States and the United Kingdom share more than diplomatic ties. They share a cultural and political conversation space. Statements made by American leaders are consumed, debated, and repurposed across British media and social platforms almost instantly. According to the strategist, when Trump attacks globalism, internationalism, or traditional power structures, those critiques are often echoed by populist movements in Britain and elsewhere. In this context, the monarchy can become a stand-in for everything critics oppose: unelected authority, historical privilege, and perceived detachment from ordinary life. Even when Trump does not directly criticize King Charles, the broader ideological framing can embolden groups that already view the monarchy with hostility. The strategist emphasizes that this is not about Trump targeting the king personally, but about creating a permissive environment in which symbolic figures become fair game for protest, harassment, or worse. Security strain in an age of permanent protest. One of the central concerns raised is security saturation. Modern leaders and symbolic figures already operate under constant threat assessment, but the strategist argues that political polarization multiplies those risks. When public discourse becomes angrier and more absolutist, protests are more frequent, rhetoric more extreme, and the line between symbolic opposition and personal hostility can blur. King Charles, unlike an elected politician, cannot retreat into partisanship or mobilize a political base for protection. His role requires visibility, public appearances, ceremonial events, and international engagements. Each appearance is both a reaffirmation of stability and, in a polarized climate, a potential focal point for dissent. According to the strategist, Trump's confrontational style contributes indirectly to this climate by normalizing political rage as a tool rather than an exception. The concern is that this normalization increases the burden on security services and raises the baseline risk level for highly symbolic figures like the king. The power of rhetoric over reality. Another dimension of the argument centers on rhetoric itself. Trump's political communication often relies on stark binaries: winners and losers, patriots and traitors, insiders and outsiders. While effective for mobilizing supporters, this framing can harden attitudes and reduce empathy for figures perceived as representing the old order. King Charles, as a monarch ascending the throne during a period of economic anxiety and cultural transition, is especially vulnerable to such framing. The strategist notes that even subtle rhetorical shifts can have tangible consequences. When authority is repeatedly portrayed as illegitimate, individuals who already harbor resentment may feel morally justified in escalating their actions. This does not mean that most people will act violently or illegally. Rather, the strategist warns of a long-tail effect, a small number of highly motivated individuals interpreting political rhetoric as validation of their grievances. Britain's internal debates and external catalysts. The strategist also points out that Britain's own internal debates amplify these risks. Questions about the future of the monarchy, regional identity, economic inequality, and post-imperial relevance are already present. External political voices, particularly from influential American figures, can act as accelerants. When Trump criticizes international alliances or mocks traditional diplomatic norms, it can resonate with British audiences who feel similarly disillusioned. In that environment, the monarchy can become an easy target, not because of anything King Charles does, but because of what he symbolizes in a global narrative of resistance against establishment power. The danger, according to the strategist, lies in convergence. Domestic discontent meeting imported rhetoric amplified through social media and directed toward a figure who cannot respond in kind. The role of media amplification. Modern media ecosystems thrive on conflict. Statements that provoke outrage travel faster and farther than those calling for restraint. The strategist argues that Trump's communication style is uniquely suited to this environment, generating constant cycles of reaction and counterreaction. Even when King Charles is not the subject, the broader narrative of attacking traditional authority figures becomes normalized. Media outlets, commentators, and online personalities may then draw comparisons, sometimes implicitly, between political elites and hereditary institutions. This constant background noise can gradually erode the sense of reverence or distance that historically protected monarchs from personalized hostility. In the strategist's view, danger emerges not from a single headline but from cumulative erosion. Diplomatic awkwardness and symbolic exposure. There is also a diplomatic angle. Trump's past comments about allies, NATO, and international norms have sometimes placed allied leaders in uncomfortable positions. While King Charles is not a policymaker, he is a living symbol of British sovereignty and continuity. The strategist suggests that if Trump were to return to power or maintain dominant influence over political discourse, moments of diplomatic tension could indirectly affect perceptions of the monarchy. Symbolic figures often bear the emotional weight of national identity, especially during international disputes. In such moments, resentment toward a foreign government can bleed into resentment toward its symbols. King Charles, visible and emblematic, could find himself absorbing anger that has little to do with his actions. Psychological dimensions of symbolic threat. Beyond politics and security, the strategist highlights psychological factors. Humans are wired to personalize abstract frustrations. Economic anxiety, cultural change, and geopolitical uncertainty often seek a face, a name, or a symbol. Monarchs have historically served this role, both positively and negatively. In stable times, they represent continuity. In unstable times, they can become lightning rods. Trump's rhetoric, which frequently emphasizes decline, betrayal, and crisis, may heighten the emotional volatility that drives such personalization. The strategist argues that when political leaders consistently frame the world as being under siege, symbolic figures like King Charles become more exposed to extreme interpretations. The absence of intent does not eliminate risk. A key point in the strategist's argument is the distinction between intent and impact. There is no claim that Trump intends harm toward King Charles. Instead, the concern is about unintended consequences. History, the strategist notes, is filled with examples where leaders' words had effects far beyond their original targets. Political language can outlive its speaker, mutate through repetition, and be weaponized by others. In this sense, the grave danger is systemic rather than personal. It arises from a political environment in which anger is legitimized, institutions are delegitimized, and symbolic figures lose the protective buffer of shared respect. Counterarguments and skepticism. Not all analysts agree with this assessment. Critics argue that the British monarchy has weathered centuries of upheaval, including revolutions, wars, and radical political movements. They point out that King Charles benefits from extensive security measures and that democratic societies are capable of managing dissent without descending into chaos. Others argue that attributing danger to Trump's rhetoric overstates the influence of any single individual. They caution against conflating correlation with causation and emphasize the agency of local actors and institutions. The strategist acknowledges these counterarguments but maintains that modern conditions are different. The speed of information, the fragmentation of authority, and the erosion of shared narratives create vulnerabilities that did not exist in previous eras. A warning rather than a prediction. Importantly, the strategist frames the claim as a warning, not a prophecy. The phrase, grave danger, they argue, is meant to provoke attention to structural risks rather than to predict a specific outcome. From this perspective, the conversation is less about Donald Trump as an individual and more about the political style he represents. Trump is seen as a powerful amplifier of trends that already exist: distrust of institutions, personalization of politics, and the elevation of conflict over consensus. King Charles, as a global symbol of continuity, inevitably stands at the intersection of these forces. The responsibility of political leadership. The strategist concludes by emphasizing responsibility. Political leaders, especially those with global influence, shape not only policies but emotional climates. Their words can either lower the temperature or raise it. In a world where symbolism matters as much as substance, leaders must consider how their rhetoric affects figures beyond their immediate political opponents. The safety of symbolic institutions, including constitutional monarchies, depends not only on guards and protocols but on the maintenance of a shared baseline of respect. Whether one agrees with the strategist's assessment or not, the argument highlights a broader truth. In the modern political landscape, no symbol is entirely insulated from global currents. King Charles's position, once protected by tradition and